Yo. Yo. What's up, my man? Hey. What's my man? Hey. Hey, man, you're parked in the middle of the drive-thru line here. Hey, sir. You alright? Dude, you're parked. You're sitting in the drive-thru line here. What's up? So you're parked in the drive-thru line. You're blocking traffic here. You were sleeping when I walked up here. What's up, man? You just have a long day or something? What's up?
This is how the interaction between the Atlanta police and Rayshard Brooks began on June 12th, 2020. This is how it ended.
You had about 1.5 drinks, but you don't remember what kind of drinks they were?
No, sir.
All right.
I really don't, Mr. Law.
All right. I think you've had too much to drink to be driving. Put your hands behind your back for me. Here, put your hands behind your back. Hey, stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! Stop fighting! You're gonna get tased! You're gonna get tased! Stop!
Mr. Law!
Stop!
Come on, man.
Stop! You're gonna get tased!
Mr. Law!
Hands off the fucking taser! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! Hands off the taser! Stop fighting! Got my fucking taser!
I'm 63.
The first paragraph of the President's Task Force on 21st Century Policing is trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve is essential in a democracy. It is key to the stability of our communities, the integrity of our criminal justice system, and the safe and effective delivery of policing services. Convened in 2015 in the wake of the killing of Michael Brown in Ferguson, Missouri, the Presidential Task Force on 21st Century Policing was co-chaired by two people. Charles Ramsey, a police chief in Philadelphia and other cities, and Lori Robinson, an academic. And in this report, the task force recommends building a policing system off of 6 pillars. Pillar 1, building trust and legitimacy. Pillar 2, policy and oversight. Pillar 3, technology and social media. Pillar 4, community policing and crime reduction. Pillar 5, training and education. And Pillar 6, officer wellness and safety. I think it's fair to say that trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve is not at the level we want it to be, that we need it to be. And I think the Rayshard Brooks case, no matter how tragic it is that he lost his life, is an event that we can try to build trust between law enforcement agencies and the people they protect and serve. And it's easy to sort of blame, either ungrateful citizens or racist cops. I don't think that really builds trust. Unless, of course, you are a racist cop or an ungrateful citizen that's trying to improve your own self. And so, I'm Greg. I do not have a background in policing, but I did have done a fair amount of research into the Rayshard Brooks case itself, which I'll get to in a minute, using as many source documents as possible. There was the 21st Century Task Force on Policing. There was the 2020 Use of Force report from the Atlanta Police Department. There's a Supreme Court decision, Tennessee versus Garner, which dictates when an officer can use lethal force. And there's the Constitution, the Fourth Amendment. There's a couple other documents as well. And so I wanted to try to synthesize these documents together and tell a story of how trust, or I hope it's a way to build trust between law enforcement agencies and the people that they protect and serve. And also explore ways that we can avoid using lethal force and ensuring that it's only used in the most dire of circumstances. One of the most important Supreme Court decisions regarding when an officer can use lethal force is Tennessee versus Garner. And this case occurred in 1985, or was decided in 1985. And it was regarding a Tennessee statute that allowed an officer to use all the necessary means to effect an arrest, regardless of the circumstances around that arrest. And so Garner was a 15-year-old boy who was suspected of burglarizing a home in Tennessee. And the officer was called to the scene, and the following happened. Garner then began to climb over a fence. Convinced that if Garner made it over the fence that he would elude capture, the officer shot him. The bullet hit Garner in the back of the head. He was taken to a hospital where he died on the operating table. $10 and a purse taken from the house were found on his body. And in the aftermath of this incident, Garner's father sued the state of Tennessee. It went all the way up to the Supreme Court, specifically saying that his son's rights were infringed based upon the Fourth Amendment, the Fifth Amendment, the Sixth Amendment, the Eighth Amendment, and the 14th Amendment. So those amendments are the unreasonable search and seizure. So the seizure of the boy's life was unreasonable. Right to trial by jury, cruel and unusual punishment. So those are the amendments involved. And the father won the case. And the Supreme Court ruled that the Tennessee statute was unconstitutional. And from that decision, an outline of when lethal force was constitutional was established. So the court concluded that such force may not be used unless it is necessary to prevent the escape and the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. As we look into the Rayshard Brooks case and try to determine whether lethal force was warranted, it needs to meet those two pieces of criteria. So necessary to prevent the escape, and the officer having probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to others or the officer. So first things first, Mr. Brooks was unarmed going into the altercation with the two officers that you saw earlier in the video.
Yes, sir.
Just walk back here. Do you have any weapons on you or anything like that?
I don't have anything on me.
Is it okay if I pat you down? Just make sure.
I have just money, gas, and that was it.
Is it okay if I pat you down to make sure you don't have any weapons?
Absolutely.
All right, can you just turn around and face away from me real quick? What is this? Is just a bunch of money in your pocket?
No, it's just my wallet.
What's all this?
It's just money.
How much money do you have in your pocket?
I mean, maybe a couple $100.
Okay. Just like a bunch of ones and stuff. Here.
Yeah,
What?
absolutely.
Can you just walk over here with me, please?
However, during the course of the altercation, Mr. Brooks was able to disarm the officer of his taser, as you can see from the dash cam video. So not only was Mr. Brooks willing and able to disarm the officer, he was also willing to fire that taser at the officer, which you can see via the Wendy surveillance camera. As Mr. Brooks is fleeing, he points and fires the taser and hits the officer in the arm, who stumbles into the car. And moments later, the officer would discharge his firearm and shoot Mr. Brooks in the back. And again, why we're looking at this is trying to determine whether the officer had probable cause to believe that the suspect posed a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officers or others. So Mr. Brooks shot the officer, tased the officer, who did not suffer a serious physical injury from the first taser shock. And was able to unholster his weapon and shoot Mr. Brooks just seconds later. And so at the time of shooting, we need to determine whether or not the suspect posed a significant threat of serious injury to the officer. And in order to answer that question, we need to know how many taser shocks are in a single cartridge, among a couple other pieces of information. But in terms of what taser was used, according to the 2020 Atlanta Use of Force report, in 2020, the Atlanta Police Department transitioned from the X2 taser to the more effective Taser 7 model. And so it's unclear whether or not this was the X2 or the Taser 7 model. But in order to understand the taser's capabilities, let's take a look at some materials that the company that manufactures the taser, Axon, produced regarding the Model 7. there's a few pieces of information that we can use to understand what happened in the Rayshard Brooks case. First and foremost is that the Model 7 had 2 shocks in a single cartridge. And further investigation shows that the X2 model also had 2 shocks in a cartridge. And so at the time he was shot by a bullet with a firearm, Mr. Brooks, the taser that Mr. Brooks had another electric shock in the chamber. And he was willing to use that since he fired upon the officer previously with an electric shock. So the question then becomes, is being shot by a single taser, does that pose a significant enough threat of serious physical injury to an officer to warrant using lethal force? And there was a report from 2005, so a bit old, but it's from Stanford, which found that the clear consensus of the research is that a one-time 5-second shock does not seriously or permanently injure a healthy and sober young adult who is not pregnant. So the officer in this case was a healthy and sober young adult who was not pregnant. However, there's lots of gray area in this consensus because later on in the report it notes that being tased causes strong muscle contractions, which usually render a subject temporarily unable to control his or her movements and may result in secondary injuries. Under certain circumstances, this loss of control can elevate the risk of serious injury or death. These circumstances may include use of the taser device on a person who is running. So the officer is running at this point, and there is an elevated risk of serious injury if he was tased again. In the dissent of Tennessee versus Garner, Justice O'Connor wrote in defense of the constitutionality of the Tennessee statute, which allowed officers to use all the necessary means to effect an arrest. So she defended the constitutionality of that by saying that the court effectively is creating a Fourth Amendment right allowing a burglary suspect to flee unimpeded from a police officer who has probable cause to arrest, who has ordered the suspect to halt, and who has no means short of firing his or her weapon to prevent escape. And for those of you who are inclined to say that the officer was warranted in shooting Mr. Brooks, I would ask you to consider that the phrase "no means short of firing his weapon to prevent escape." And so what were the means available to the officer to prevent escape? One was physical altercation. Another was CEW, the conducting electronic weapon, taser. And then third and finally was lethal force. And I want to focus on that first one, the physical altercation. So there's a point right at the beginning after Mr. Brooks tries to break free where both officers are on top of him. And despite this, eventually Mr. Brooks, who was being apprehended for being too drunk to drive a vehicle, was able to escape from 2 officers and disarm one of those officers' weapons. And so that points to lack of training, a lack of preparation on the part of the system that put those individual officers in that situation. The use of force report from the Atlanta Police Department from 2020 mentions a series of trainings required of officers on the force regarding their use of force involving the citizens of Atlanta. And these trainings include continuing with the current training protocol regarding less lethal force weapons, first aid training, de-escalation training, fair and impartial policing, how to restrain a combative suspect using group dynamics, resolving conflicts verbally, resolving disputes and neutralizing threats using a team concept. The first paragraph of the syllabus of Tennessee versus Garner reads that apprehension by the use of deadly force is a seizure subject to the Fourth Amendment's reasonableness requirement. To determine whether such a seizure is reasonable, the extent of the intrusion on the suspect's rights under that amendment must be balanced against the governmental interests in effective law enforcement. And in trying to maintain that balance, the court concluded that such lethal force may not be used unless it is necessary to prevent the escape and the officer has probable cause to believe that the suspect poses a significant threat of death or serious physical injury to the officer or others. And there are phrases in there that aren't clear-cut. What one person believes is necessary to prevent the escape is different from another person's belief on what is necessary to prevent the escape. What one person believes is probable cause is different than another's. Posing a significant threat of death or serious physical injury is different from one person to another. So, I have my own opinion about it. You have yours. But I think regardless of what that opinion is, we can come to a common understanding of the way things have been and the way things are can't be what can't be how the way things work in the future. And so how to enact that change is is a question I don't know the answer to. I don't think anybody does. If they say they do, then don't believe them. But it requires listening to people who have dedicated their lives to creating a better system, to evolving the system to meet the needs of the 21st century. The Charles Ramseys of the world, the Lori Robinsons of the world, the 800 some odd thousand police officers whose heart is in the right place, the individuals and organizations who are on the front lines making sure that people who have been ignored or whose perspective has been minimized have a seat at the table. It's only through these conversations and discussions where we can reach an understanding of one another and come up with a plan that might work.
Come on, man. Man, that's messed up, man.